Good morning. The topic for today is surgery for temporomandibular joint. So the last class was about the disease of temporomandibular joint and what are the signs and symptoms and what are their management. So this class is more about the surgical intervention that is to be carried out for such pathologies that was discussed in previous classes. By the end of the topic, the student should be able to distinguish TMJ disorders which require surgical treatment from those which do not, describe surgical approaches to TMJ and identify anatomical sources of surgical complication. Evaluate the benefits of more common surgical treatments of temporomandibular joint. List possible conservative treatments and select a scheme of management of patient with TMJ disorder. Explain the clinical feature and management and protocols for TMJ ankylosis. So what is surgical anatomy of temporomandibular joint? The surgical anatomy is that the temporomandibular joint itself is small. It has got many important anatomic structures nearby. So when you are going to go for a surgical procedure in relation to TMJ, then you need to know in detail about the anatomy of the TMJ so that you don't end up in complications after the surgery. So the region of temporomandibular joint has the structures like parotid gland, superficial temporal vessel, facial and auriculotemporal nerves. These are the structures that are in close proximity with temporomandibular joint. When a surgical intervention is made in temporomandibular joint for any reason, to release ankylosis or to fix the fracture, then these structures has to be taken into consideration so that you don't injure these structures to avoid postoperative complications. The first one in that is the parotid gland. So the parotid gland lies below the zygomatic arch and in front of the external excreting mucus. You all know the basic anatomy. External excreting mucus, in front of that lies the arch. Then you got masseter muscle in proximity to the parotid gland and behind the ramus of the mandible. So the superficial pore of parotid lies directly on the TMJ capsule. So you need to be more careful when you are dissecting the temporomandibular joint for the parotid superficial pore. So the parotid gland itself is enclosed with the capsule derived from the superficial layer of the deep cervical fascia, frequently called as parotid masseteric fascia or parotid masseteric sling. The second one is about the second anatomic structure which you need to know about is about the superficial temporal artery, which is a branch of the external carotid artery. You can see the picture clearly. So the terminal branches of an external carotid artery are superficial temporal and maxillary artery. You can see them both in proximity with the temporomandibular joint. Superficial temporal artery comes in proximity when you give an incision for accessing the temporomandibular joint, whereas the maxillary artery lies beneath the neck of the condyle. So when you are trying to cut the condyle or try to release the ankylotic mass, then you need to be careful of maxillary artery. Accident penetration of this will lead to severing maxillary artery and there can be a profuse bleeding which is very difficult to get the hemostasis. So you can see that picture on the right side shows that the maxillary artery lies beneath the neck of the condyle, whereas the superficial temporal artery ascends up before the acoustic meatus, and then you need to be careful when accessing or giving an incision preauricularly to access the temporomandibular joint, which we'll see in the next few slides. The next important structure is facial nerve. You all know the facial nerve exits through the stylomastoid foramen. From the stylomastoid foramen, it enters and it gives the branches. You can see the branches cervical and temporal. So the temporal ascends up, whereas the cervical goes down, and it supplies to the neck as marginal mandibular. So all those 5 branches, you have heard of pes ansanaris, the 5 branches which supplies the motor supply to the facial muscles, will get affected if the nerve is damaged. So you can see the red lines that are marked, which shows the approximate length where the nerve is situated. So if a preauricular incision is planned, to avoid injury to the temporofacial division, it should be within 0.8 to 3.5 centimeter. That is the range which has been exhibited from the external acoustic meatus. Whereas to avoid cervical branch division trauma, it is approximately 1.3 centimeter from the inferior aspect of the external acoustic meatus. So your incision should not extend more than 1.3 centimeter inferior to the external acoustic meatus. So these are the landmarks that has to be kept in mind when you are planning for an incision to avoid injury to the facial nerve. The facial nerve will be embedded within the flap that is being elevated. So to avoid injury, the facial nerve has to be embedded within the flap, so that post-operative there not be any palsy that has been exhibited due to over attraction. So coming to the surgical approaches of temporomandibular joint, there are various approaches: submandibular, post-ramal, post-auricular, endoral, preauricular, Digmans, Blair, Thomas, Popwich modification of Alcott-Bramley, hemicoronal approach, bicoronal approach. Out of all these approaches, preauricular approach is the one which is more commonly practiced, which is also called as an Alcott-Bramley incision, followed by submandibular approach, a resistance incision to access the temporomandibular joint, or a combination of both if there is a more wider area that has to be accessed. So these are the names of the incision that has been commonly in practice to access temporomandibular joint. So this is the common one that has been in practice, the Alcott and Bramley, named after the person who invented it. So it's an extension of the preauricular incision. So you can see a dotted line, that is a preauricular incision, and then it extends over the temporal region, then it is called as Alcott-Bramley incision. Then you got an endoral incision. This is more commonly done to hide the scar from the preauricular region. Each incision has got their own advantages and disadvantages. So you can see a preauricular incision is being given. So you can see the extent of incision. As I already told, to avoid the facial nerve injury, the incision has to be kept within 0.8 to 3.5 centimeter anteriorly, and the inferior should not extend more than 1 centimeter on an average from the inferior aspect of the external acoustic meatus, which is that landmark which are going to taken into consideration. So after incision, dissection has been done, subcutaneous tissue is dissected, and the fascia is reflected. Once you see the fascia, then a horizontal incision is placed. taking the facial nerve into the flap. So you can see clearly now. Earlier we saw the normal picture. Now we can see how the incision is made over the fascia, and then you can see the aponeurotic system, and then extending the periosteal levator to access the joint. So now you can see very clearly that the facial nerve goes into the flap. Avoid over retraction during this time to avoid traction injury to the facial nerve, which can cause a Bell's palsy, a transient Bell's palsy. After the incision is placed, after the joint is reached, then a vertical incision is given to expose the flap, and the joint is exposed to carry out whatever procedure that needs to be done. Either an ankylosing mass is resected, or any form of articular eminence procedure has to be done, or any fixation has to be done. So this is how a temporomandibular joint is being accessed. So as you saw about the temporomandibular ankylosing, it's a development of a significant or complete limitation of movement of temporomandibular joint by bone or fibrous tissue. So you need to know what is trismus, you need to know what is pseudoankylosis, what is true ankylosis. So trismus, you all would have read already about the condition which muscle spasm or a contracture prevents the mouth of opening of the mouth. Whereas pseudoankylosis interferes with the joint mobility and due to fibrous adhesions within the joint structure. A true ankylosis of temporomandibular joint is that the intracapsular condition where there is fusion of the bony surface of both the joints, so the patient will not be able to move or open the mouth, and there will be absolute no movement of TMJ will be felt when we palpate. So the causes could be due to trauma, infection, inflammation, systemic diseases, and other causes. The trauma can be congenital at birth, hemarthrosis, condylar fracture, glenoid fossa fracture. So hemarthrosis is nothing but blood in the joint which gets organized, and then it becomes an ankylosing mass within the joint. So infections, otitis media, mastoiditis, perioditis, tonsillitis, furuncle, abscess around the joint, osteomyelitis, or actinomyces are the common infection that can be exhibited. So inflammations like rheumatoid arthritis or septic arthritis, which can cause restriction of mouth opening. Systemic disease like scarlet fever, typhoid, gonococcal arthritis, scleroderma, beriberi, ankylosing spondylitis. The rare causes are polyarthritis and measles. The other causes could be there can be a bifid condyle, the prolonged trismus, prolonged immobilization, and burns could be caused for restricted mouth opening. So based on the tissue type involved, it can be false or true, it can be fibrous or bony. Based on the location, it can be extraarticular or intraarticular. Based on the extent of fusion, it can be partial or it can be complete. Based on the side involved, it can be unilateral or bilateral. Kazanjian in 1938 classified ankylosis of TMJ into true and false. Again, true ankylosis as fibrous and bony ankylosis. Straith and Lewis classification was based on the ankylosis due to inflammation. If there is primary inflammation of the joint, or it can be a secondary inflammation due to nearby local process, or secondary inflammation due to generalized bloodstream infection. The Shawnee's classification has 4 well-defined types depending upon the pathologic changes seen. So type 1 is flattening of deformity of condyle with little joint space seen on the radiograph. Type 2 is bony fusion of outer edge of the articular surface but no fusion with the deeper area of the joint. Type 3, there is a bridge of bone between the ramus of the mandible and the zygomatic arch. and type 4 is the entire joint is replaced by mass of bone. So this clearly shows the volume of the ankylosis that has been there, which helps us to plan a treatment based on the type. The clinical feature of ankylosis depends upon the severity, time of onset and duration. The clinical feature differs for unilateral and bilateral. So for unilateral, there is obvious facial asymmetry. The deviation of mandible and chin on the affected side. The chin is receded with hypoplastic mandible on the affected side. Roundness and fullness of face on the affected side. The appearance of flatness and elongated on the unaffected side. The lower border of the mandible on the affected side has a concavity that ends with a well-defined antegonial notch when palpated or when an OPG is taken. The identification of unilateral is the affected side will look normal. So this is one of the points that has to be noted, that in a unilateral ankylosis, the affected side will look normal than the unaffected side. In unilateral ankylosis, some amount of oral mouth opening may be possible because of the movement of the condyle on one side. Intraincisal opening will vary depending on whether it is fibrous or bony ankylosis. There will be a crossbite seen, angles class 2 division on the affected side plus unilateral posterior crossbite on the ipsilateral side. Condylar movements are absent on the affected side because of the fusion of the ankylotic mass with the clinical features of bilateral ankylosis are inability to open the mouth, progresses by gradual decrease in intraincisal opening, symmetrical mandibular micrognathia, typical bird face with receded chin. The neck chin angle may be reduced or almost completely absent. Antegonial notch is well defined bilaterally, which can be appreciated in an orthopantomogram. Class 2 malocclusion. Upper incisors are often protrusive with anterior open bite. Mouth opening is 5 mm or less than that, or no mouth opening. Multiple caries rates and bad periodontal health because of maintenance of oral hygiene is not possible due to mouth opening. To confirm the diagnosis, a history has to be clearly elicited. Look for the clinical findings and advise a radiographic finding. For radiographic finding, you need to have OPG, which shows both the joints, or you can go for lateral oblique view, which gives the AP anteroposterior dimension of the mass. Lateral cephalogram to evaluate the associated skeletal deformity. Posterior view to look for the medial-lateral extent of the mass. Cone beam CT also can be advised, a CBCT, to check for the ankylotic mass. The goals of surgery are to release the ankylotic mass and creation of gap, to mobilize the joint, to create a functional joint, to reconstruct joint and restore the vertical height of the ramus, to prevent recurrence, to improve aesthetic and rehabilitation of the patient. The gold standard protocol that has been followed for an ankylosis are aggressive resection, ipsilateral coronoidectomy, contralateral coronoidectomy, lining of the TMJ with temporal fascia or cartilage, reconstruction of ramus with a costochondral graft, rigid fixation, early mobilization and aggressive physiotherapy. So after aggressive resection, there should be a clear gap between the two bony edges. If ipsilateral coronoidectomy is carried out, if the desirable mouth opening is not achieved, then the contralateral coronoidectomy is carried on. Then the temporomandibular joint is lined with temporalis fascia, which is elevated from the facial aspect superiorly and then lined over the glenoid fossa. To avoid recurrence or re-ankylosis, this fascia will prevent the bone to re-ankylose. To get the function, it can be reconstructed with costochondral graft and then rigid fixation of the graft so that there is no mobilization of the graft. Mouth opening has to be early so that leaving a longer duration can cause ankylosis again. An aggressive physiotherapy of mouth opening exercise will prevent re-ankylosis. All this is targeted towards avoiding re-ankylosis after the surgery. So condylectomy, gap arthroplasty, interposition arthroplasty are the common ones which has been carried out for an ankylosis, either unilateral or bilateral. The condylectomy, it is advocated in case of fibrous ankylosis, where the joint space is obliterated with the deposition of fibrous band. There is not much of the condylar head deformity, so condylectomy alone will help in getting the desired result. Gap arthroplasty is always carried out if there is going to be an extensive bone ankylosis, where a broad thick area bone obliteration, the entire joint has been obliterated, then you go for gap arthroplasty. An interposition arthroplasty is being done if there is an exterior bone ankylosis. Creation of barrier between the cut bone edges to minimize the risk of recurrence and to maintain the vertical head of the ramus. An interpositional graft material is being placed after the resection. As we already saw, the same preauricular incision, alkyd-Bramley incision, postauricular, endoral, coronal, submandibular, intraoral, zygomatic arch incision are the common approaches for an ankylosis. Anesthesia, so indirect nasal intubation, fiber optic intubation and tracheostomy, as the patient will not be able to open his mouth. These are the methods that are being used to administer general anesthesia. So material used for interposition arthroplasty are either it is autogenous or alloplastic materials. So the autogenous material are costochondral graft, metatarsal, sternoclavicular joint or calvarear bone graft. For lining the glenoid fossa, you use a dermis graft or temporal myofascial flap or an articular cartilage graft. So these are the things which have been used. Temporalis myofascial flap is commonly based inferiorly on the deep temporal artery, rotated over the zygomatic arch, the muscle facing the condylar surface so that the ankylosis doesn't happen. The alloplastic material that are available are titanium foil, the metallic one, stainless steel, titanium and gold. The non-metallic ones like silastic sheets, Teflon sheets, acrylic, nylon and ceramics are being used as an interpositional material to avoid re-ankylosis. So the advantages of alloplastic material over autogenous graft is lack of donor site morbidity, which is more important. There is reduced surgical time because donor site has to be prepared and a surgical hour is going to be more if you want to take an autogenous graft. Potential for decreased hospitalization, immediate function and no need to go for prolonged intermaxillary fixation. Ability to maintain stable occlusion post-surgically. Indications for alloplastic materials. So when there is a joint with severe anatomic discrepancies, when there is failed autogenous bone graft resulting in scarring, poorly vascularized tissue bed, then you go for alloplastic material. If there is destruction of autogenous bone by pre-existing foreign body reaction, or if there is going to be a recurrent ankylosis with a history of excessive heterotopic bone formation, then you go for alloplastic material as an interpositional material in gap arthroplasty. The next one is chronic subluxation. This disease is always associated with severe pain and refractory to the conservative line of treatment. Miller and Murphy in 1976 advised capsular tightening procedure, reaction of mechanical obstruction or a block, direct restoration of the condyle, creation of new muscle balance, and removal of mechanical obstacle are the one which has been commonly in practice as a treatment modality for chronic subluxation of temporomandibular joint. The capsular tightening procedure or capsulorrhaphy, which is nothing but a shortening of the capsule by removing a section and suturing it back in tight position. So to reach the capsule, the same preauricular incision and is being used. The same steps what we followed for accessing condyle has to be done. So after reaching the capsule, a vertical incision is placed on the capsule and then drawing it tight by overlapping the edges and suturing is being done. Reinforcement of the capsule by turning down or a strip of temporomandibular fascia and suturing to the capsule also helps to tighten the capsule. The creation of mechanical obstacle to avoid subluxation is you create a mechanical obstruction in the region of the articular eminence so that it can effectively block the excessive anterior exclusion of the condyle. Ligament pins or osteotomy of the eminence and turned it down in front of the condylar head can be used. A Mayer graft over the eminence from the zygoma to increase the height is also being used. Placement of silastic block or Vitalium mesh implants increase the height. Daughtry's procedure, which is nothing but osteotomy of the zygomatic arch, depressing it and leaving it in front of the articular eminence and allow it to fuse so that the condyle head does not slip away when the mouth is opened. Or Finlay's L-shaped pin is anchored in the zygomatic process, projecting anteriorly to the condyle, which prevents the condyle from slipping out of the eminence. So these are the mechanical obstacles that can be created. Again, the condyle steps to access the condyle has to be done to reach and do all these procedures. So direct restraint of condyle, temporal fascia can be turned down and sutured to the lateral surface of the articular capsule. Piece of fascia lata threaded through hole in zygomatic arch, second hole in the condyle, fascia tightened until half of the preoperative opening is existed. So creation of new muscle balance, the plication of temporalis and masseter muscle and medial pterygoid myotomy can be performed. This can be performed intraorally to get the medial pterygoid myotomy to create a new muscle balance. Removal of mechanical obstruction. The surgical removal of obstacles believed to block or restrict condyle from retaining its normal position in the glenoid fossa. Meniscectomy, eye condylectomy, eminectomy are the common procedures that are done to avoid or remove the mechanical obstacles. The indications for eminectomy is recurrent episodes of dislocation, chronic hypermobility associated with severe pain, irreversible TMJ pain associated with clicking or grafting. Eminectomy is a procedure which is relatively simple to perform. Joint cavity not open, avoid injury to meniscus and capsule, perform under local anesthesia bilaterally. A small horizontal incision over the zygomatic arch in the region of articular eminence in front of the tragus is placed. Articular eminence is located approximately 1.5 cm anterior to the external auditory meatus. The location of eminence is marked with marking ink prior to the incision. Eminence is exposed by T-shaped incision. Horizontal portion over and parallel to the arch has been placed. Vertical portion extending to the apex of the eminence is done. Periosteum is reflected, and then burr holes are drilled, and then holes are connected with fissure bar. The eminence is sectioned and separated with a broad osteotome. Then the base is smoothened. The most important thing is you need to be careful about the meningeal artery. Accidental injury can cause hemorrhage to the middle meningeal artery when doing this procedure. The next one is arthrocentesis, the treatment for a closed lock or an internal derangement. Initially, it is conservative. If it is failed, surgical contouring and repositioning of the disc has to be done. Arthroscopic lysis and lavage also can be done. Use of hydraulic pressure in the upper joint compartment to lavage the joint so that all the inflammatory contents are being expelled. So the indications are the patient refractory to conservative treatment, medicines, vitaplace and physiotherapy, then arthrocentesis has been indicated. So our objective is to improve disc mobility, to eliminate pain and joint inflammation, to remove the resistance to condylar translation and to restore normal function. The hypothesis in doing arthrocentesis is due to sinusitis, the sliding of the disc is prevented by addition of the disc to the fossa. The mediators of the prostaglandin and the leukotriene B are being washed out by the lavage. So these are the inflammatory mediators that are being washed out when doing a lavage. So these are the basic armamentarium that is being used. You can see a series of syringes. Those are the salines that are being used. You can see all the surgical marking pens, scale to measure, to locate where to insert. You can see 2 needle syringes. So those are the syringes that are being used, one for the entry of the solution and one for exit. To do this arthrocentesis, the McCain's landmark for entry has to be identified. How do we do that? A line has to be drawn from the middle of the tragus to the outer canthus of the eye, which is the tragocanthal line. You got 2 points, one from the glenoid fossa, 10 mm from the mid tragus, 2 mm below the tragal line, and you got point B, which is the articular eminence, 10 mm from the point and 10 mm below the tragal line. These 2 points, you can see the tragal line which is drawn from the tragus of the ear to the external canthus of the eye. Then you can see 2 dots that have been kept, point A and point B. One is 2 mm below the tragal line and one is 10 mm below. One shows the glenoid fossa and the second point shows the articular eminence. So to that point, 2 needles are being inserted. So you can see those 2 needles. So warm Ringer lactate solution is being injected, and then the second needle is distended. A 50 to 70 ml of solution can be used to lavage the joint. So this is a clinical picture showing how a lavage has been done. You can see 2 needles clearly being placed. One is for the articular eminence and one is for the glenoid fossa in front. And you can see in the third picture the lavage solution coming out of the point B when you inject a solution in point A. So what you give after post arthrocentesis? NSAIDs and diazepams are being advised for a soft diet. Then physiotherapy to establish the normal maxillomandibular occlusion. This procedure can be repeated after 1 week 3 to 4 times to reduce the inflammation. The advantage of arthrocentesis is simple technique, minimum armamentarium, less invasive, inexpensive, effective, and has got a therapeutic benefit. The next one is arthroscopy, which can be performed only under general anesthesia. Arthro is joint, scope is to view. The insertion of especially designed fiber optic endoscope into the joint compartment for observation and treatment is arthroscopy. So arthroscopy can be done to any joint in the human body. So TMJ arthroscope indication, they can be done for biopsy, confirmation of diagnostic findings, persistent TMJ pain which does not respond to medical therapy, internal realignment of temporomandibular joint, or there is hypermobility with additions, disc immobility and displacement, joint with recurrent trauma and degenerative and synovial disease, and if there is going to be a hypermobility. The contraindications for arthroscopy are underlying medical instabilities, overlying skin infections, malignant tumor seeding. Absolute will be bony ankylosis, advanced resorption of the unit fossa. So anesthesia consideration, whether it's going to be outpatient or inpatient setting, LA combined with the IV sedation. There can be lysis of additions, amenorrhea release, capsular stretch procedures can be done through this arthroscopy. So the general principles of arthroscopy are: the joint should remain fully distended, allowing easier trocar puncture and minimize the risk of iatrogenic intercapsular damage. Skin should be punctured with a sharp trocar. Intra-articular procedure should be done with care to prevent articular surface damage. Attention should be given to preserve as much healthy synovium as possible in order to enhance its physiological effect of the joint. The joint space should be kept expanding during instrumentation by a slow infusion irrigating system. So this is a picture of an arthroscopy, how it is being done. So you can see the arthroscope. So you can see a trocar is being placed into the joint space, and then an irrigation is being done in the joint space. A light source also can be connected. You can see a cold light source to visualize what is happening inside exactly, and it can be very precise. So this is an equipment. It's got a forceps knife and scissors. Depending upon the type of procedure, you can have that attached to the scope, or you can use a laser or mini shaver through this arthroscopy. These are the list of arthroscopic procedures that can be done. Coming to complications, there can be a vascular injury, extravasation, scuffing. The instruments can break. Otologic complication because it's close to the ear, or there can be intracranial damage. And if the infection protocol is not followed, there can be an infection. So you can see a nerve injury. So this picture we already showed you how to avoid. So this will be the complication if you don't follow the protocol that has been explained earlier. The same holds good for an arthroscopic procedure as well when you want to access the temporomandibular joint. The postoperative the intensive training for chronic lock cases, and there should be a gradual training of disc repositioning cases. There should be vertical mouth opening, lateral extrusion, protrusive or gliding movement, and isometric exercises to follow. Then you need to follow with the rule of 3, 2, and 1. You need to go back. So how are the patients managed after surgery? Immediate post-op care will be airway and hemorrhage. Patient not in IMF, maxillomandibular fixation. Physiotherapy is started as soon as possible. Initial application of ice packs followed by hot packs. Small finger exercise. A bundle of tongue depressors have been given and then they are increased day by day post-operative to increase the mouth opening. In case if there is IMF done, IMF can be done only to a maximum of 10 days. After relief of IMF, put the patient on soft diet, teach them the jaw opening exercise, activate the range of motion and passive motion by finger stretching, bundle of tongue depressors have been placed. Start the solid diet after 3 to 4 weeks. The complications are aspiration of blood during extubation, throat can be packed prior to surgery, hemorrhage due to vessels, facial nerve damage, auriculotemporal damage, damage to the glenoid fossa leading to entry into the middle cranial fossa, infection, open bite, and recurrence of necrosis. So these are the complications that can happen in any temporomandibular joint surgery if you are going to access the joint for any reason. So this class gives you a broad idea how the temporomandibular joint has been accessed for various reasons and for various procedures, and what are the complications that can occur when you access the temporomandibular joint for this surgery surgically. Thank you.